Hey y'all, and how's it going? Welcome to a segment of HalloWeek. Throughout the week, I'm going to be reading spooky stories, and then right afterwards, reacting to the TV show or movie that the movie or show was based on. We are starting off strong with my very first Stephen King novel ever, and I decided to read his debut novel. Carrie has been a staple horror story. Even though I had previously never read the book beforehand, I understood that there was some sort of like nuance with Carrie of making big waves when Stephen King first came out with it. This video ended up being a lot longer than I thought it would because I had a lot of thoughts. So I'm not gonna waste any more time, and without further ado, let's get started. Hello, I know I look like garbage today, but something needs to be said. Well, I haven't even started reading Carrie yet, okay? And I'm trying to just, like mark the places where I generally do my reviews because I set up my reading vlogs and my reading reviews. I have a setup, I have strategy, okay? I read the first 3 chapters. I say my piece. I get to a third of the way through. I say what I think of the book. I get halfway through. I give a synopsis, and then I finish the book and then give you an overall, I guess, like feeling about the book. I don't know who Stephen King thinks he is. My guy didn't put any chapters in this. There are only 3 parts. There are no chapter headings. There are no chapters. I didn't know what to do. So basically what I have decided is that I basically guessed if he were to make chapters in this book, my guess is he would probably make around 12 to 15 pages each chapter. So once I get to see, I literally just said once I get to chapter. There are no chapters. Once I get to page 50, then I will give you an overview of what I have read so far as if I have read 3 chapters. That really that threw me off. And I don't know how I feel about that. Now I'm really nervous to read it because I feel like I really love short chapters. I would much rather read a book with like 100 chapters that were really short rather than 20 chapters that were really long. I just feel like it helps me be motivated to read. But there were also reviews online that were saying it was actually helpful that there were no chapters because then they were actually much further in the book than they thought they would be. Does Stephen King do this with all of his books? Or is it just Carrie? Also, I'm a little confused whenever people say this is his debut novel. Okay, what is the definition of a debut novel? Is it actually the first novel that you sell? Or is it the first novel that you sell that does good? Hi, honey. Stephen, we need to have a little talk. I knew from the get-go that a weak point of Stephen King's was accurately writing women. And that's not even the problem here right now. The problem is that he's writing about the woman experience and obviously did 0 research. 0. I get this is his debut novel, okay? And I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Even in your debut novel, that is not an excuse to just make assumptions about a gender you don't know anything about. And that was like from the get-go, that's what happened in this book. So this book, as I explained before, does not have chapters. So I read until chapter 50, which surprisingly, I was actually able to get to page 50 relatively quicker than most other books. So even though I was nervous about not having any chapters to anchor myself to, it seems to be working in my favor. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a big fan of Carrie. And I mean, yeah, it's horrible that she has like a very religiously abusive mom, which I'm gonna get to in a second. I'm not rooting for her. And I don't know why. Because you would think that the girl that's getting bullied for no reason and the girl that has an abusive mom would be someone you would want to feel good and okay with. And for some reason, I don't care. And I think it's because we are hearing her monologue. And most of her inner monologue is violent, which like, I get it, all that trauma. You probably don't actually accurately understand the concept between right and wrong. You could do a whole essay on that, whatever. But what I am saying is that generally with your main characters, you want the reader to root for them because you want them to care about their story. And at this point, I just don't care. The thing about the woman experience, okay, that was very confusing for me. So I'm gonna be giving away a lot of spoilers in the beginning. So in the beginning, Carrie gets her first period, and everybody is shocked that she gets her first period when she's 17, because he kept on nailing in the head over and over and over again of how shocked everybody was that that was her first period. It's not likely that you get your first period later and that late. I have heard of many women getting their first period when they're 16. Generally, it happens before they're 18. I feel like if you are 18, you haven't had your first period yet, you should go to the gynecologist, like, see what's going on. But I feel like 17 is kind of like at the later end, but it's not shocking. Okay, I myself got my period at 14, and a lot of people, if they were like looking at the statistics, are like, wow, you got your period late. But I didn't. The reference, which, oh my God, drove me insane. The reference to that the teacher was making, where she was like, well, I got my first period when I was 11. I'm like, girl, that's early. Like, he was making it seem like 11 was normal. He also doesn't understand, like, how women treat each other. And this is not me saying, like, women love women. No, girl, I know. But they're not going to act like men in a locker room. The scene that he described of Carrie being bullied about not being sanitary and not using a tampon before they realized, like, oh, she's never had a period before, she doesn't even know what's going on. They threw, like, sanitary pads at her and, like, tampons. Women don't do that. Girls aren't gonna say it to your face. No, no, no. See, public humiliation is not necessarily a woman's vibe. They would have noticed that Carrie was on her period. They would have gone, oh my gosh, and whispered to their friends, and then spread around any and every type of rumor, okay? That Carrie is disgusting, that she just doesn't wear tampons or pads because she thinks they're unholy. That's what would actually happen, I feel like. And if enough girls were huddled around and laughing about it, then maybe they'd notice, like, you're like kind of bleeding, Carrie. Like, do you need a pad? Like, something like that. Like, being nice, but you know for a goddamn fact, they have no interest in being nice. Hi there, it's Editing Jasmine. I am realizing that there are many things that I did not go over very clearly as I was in a very high emotional state, and I am listening to the video and realizing there were some things that I did not clarify as well. I am a much better writer than I am a speaker, so I'm just going to read out loud what I was going to paste for people to pause and read. Women-on-women representation is a stark difference to men in groups. The reason from my experience is that women are not slow to humiliate, but they do it more passively and under the rug to avoid staining their reputation, as the character stereotypically known as Chris in the book would most likely do. Women will dumb things down to avoid looking like a bitch to other people, to avoid the same fate she put on others. However, I would not put the pig's blood crank past her, which I know is a little bit of a futuristic spoiler alert. I also wrote down that women are more likely to be very passive rather than upfront about their bullying, mainly because they do not want anything tied back to them. And also, a lot of the times they will lie and say that somebody else did it too. I've seen that happen a million times before. They will not take ownership of the bad things that they have done, even if they know that they're wrong, because they don't want to pay the consequences for it, where I feel like stereotypically guys that are a little bit more badass, it seems that the consequence is kind of a part of the experience. So that's my take. Also, the representation of religion in here is so wild. Speaking as a more religious person myself, and understanding that there are people that make wild accusations about religion who are not a part of religion, and religious people who make wild accusations, misinterpreting and misunderstanding religion for their own benefit. You see both sides, okay? And you gotta admit they're both there. I just don't understand how her mom is getting all of these different ideas, and I honestly don't think that she genuinely believes them. I feel like Carrie's mom is more like Angela. I feel like that's the vibe I'm getting from Carrie's mom, because I don't think Carrie's mom is stupid. He's illustrating this as if she is like some deranged, crazy, stupid, religious woman. I don't think she is. I think she knows exactly what she's doing. I think that what is bothering me is that he's just making like stuff up. And maybe that's the point. Like, you're supposed to be frustrated with how ridiculous her claims are. Like, for one, she told Carrie that she would never grow boobs because they were dirty pillows and only bad girls got boobs. But it's just things like that where I'm like, I haven't even heard that from crazy zealots. boobs being dirty pillows? Did you hear that from someone, Steven? Like, can you reference something? Sorry, another editor's note. As far as just like religiously, I think that I was just a little bit disappointed that I didn't hear more realistic forms of religious abuse, and I feel like that could have been an opportunity to represent that and show that it is wrong. But I also think it was hard to do that because you couldn't quite tell if Carrie's mom was psychotic or if she was manipulating her. And I looked it up later, and I know that she's like meant to be psychotic, which kind of takes away from actual religious abuse that people really do experience. It is definitely more likely that people who experience actual religious abuse are dealing with manipulators and not people who are psychotic. So I think that I would have preferred that Carrie's mom was being extremely manipulative and saying all of these crazy things, but it was on purpose and not because she was psychotic. Because then that kind of gives her, like, not necessarily an out, but blaming more mental illness rather than actually taking accountability for the things that she did wrong. So that's the reason why I was saying I just don't think that religiously it is represented very well, because on the negative end, it's not represented well, nor is it represented well on the realistic end of things. And at first I thought that was kind of the point because she's manipulative. It just turns out that she's psychotic, so it doesn't hit as hard. And the thing is that I don't know who this is targeted to. I get that this is horror. I know that I'm not a big fan of horror, but I am shocked that this got as popular as it did within the first 3 chapters. Maybe it got popular because it was just weird and didn't make sense, and people were like, what is this? Like, I gotta figure this story out now. He has zero idea of what having your first period is actually like. He described period cramps so horribly. I don't know what line it is, and I can't look it up because, like, there are no chapters. He literally said the cramps in her stomach and her back and her privates stopped hurting. I don't know about you. I don't know how other women, like, have period cramps, and this is just me speaking from my personal experience. I've never had like pain in my private area. That's not inclusive. That's not where your uterus is. Like, literally, he could have just talked to a woman and been like, hey, tell me about periods, and then wrote it better. It's disappointing. It is very disappointing because I've only heard, rather than that portion of like him not knowing how to write women, is that he's very, very good at what he does. And honestly, not impressed. Not impressed. And I don't know who this is targeted to. Like, who is this for? I was initially very, very upset because I thought that her traumatic menstrual cycle situation that was so poorly written would be the jumpstart of her trauma. And like, oh, this is the first traumatic event that Carrie has had that was so intense. And that's what they were kind of alluding to initially. But then there was one story where there was just like rocks that just rained from the sky only on Carrie's and Carrie's mom's house. And it was kind of weird. I was like, whoa, that came out of like left field. But then it clicked and I connected, oh, it's because something traumatic happened to Carrie right before the storm of stones came in. I don't know. Like, this is a fever dream, okay? It's a fever. It's not even horror at this point. It's just a fever dream. And this is only like the first 50 pages. But I will read it. I will read it through. I will do it for you guys. Thank you for listening to my rant. Sorry if you love Stephen King. It's just not written for me. All right, I will catch you guys later once I read to a third of the way through. Hello everybody, going to see how this goes filming on my phone. I don't love filming on my phone. It's not necessarily like the best quality most of the time. However, it is quite convenient. I am in the parking lot at the library right now because it has been about a month since I checked these out. So I rechecked them out, and this is your reminder to go support your local library. It's a great way to avoid hoarding books and to also read the book before buying it so that you can decide if you actually really like it or not, and you're not just buying a bunch of books that you don't end up liking. So, would highly recommend your public library. Also, yes, I look crazy. I just went on a hike with my dog, so just deal with it. And yes, I am the dog dad. Don't tell my husband I stole his hat. Let's start off with this guy. So I am actually halfway through Carrie now. I was so incredibly tempted to DNF this book once I got to a third of the way through. So basically the deal that I made with myself is that if the book made me angry enough and was not fun enough to read and experience by the time it was a third of the way through the book, then I was going to DNF it, and I was just going to record myself reacting to looking up like a Wikipedia summary of it. However, Stephen King did something very sneaky. Right, literally like mere pages before I got to a third of the way through. It was a bit intriguing. Not based on the way that he wrote, but just how the story and the plot was going. So, well played, Stephen. And also, a third of the way through and halfway through was only a 20-page difference. So I kind of just like read throughout those pages too, to ensure that I wasn't being hoodwinked by it actually becoming decent. I still am not a big fan of the book, but I don't hate it as much as I did in the very beginning. I think that's something that turned it around was actually finding some of the characters likable. Carrie not included at this point. I mean, she's a little bit more likable than she was in the very beginning, but she's still not my favorite. But there are a couple of side characters that I actually am rooting for, and I can understand and see their perspectives of. So I think that made it a little better. However, there were portions in this book that genuinely made me angry and upset between the first 50 pages to a third of the way through. One of the main ones being this line. I'm not going to say it out loud because 100% YouTube would either like demonetize my video or take it down. So I'm just gonna show you right here. That sentence on its own is extremely problematic and disturbing. I understand that this is meant to be horror, but that's not even the problem. Like, the horror aspect is not the problem here. And it's so, like, that line is so messed up. Surprise, surprise, she's back with another editor's note. I realized I didn't specifically say why I thought that line was messed up. So initially when I read it, I actually read it backwards, and I read it as if he was alluding to the fact that anyone who can become a artist, which is not true. But the way that he wrote it, it was very easy to get that like mixed up in my brain for some reason. But like, why would you even think of that? Why would you even think of that analogy? Analogies are not always helpful. In fact, a lot of the times they're not helpful, especially if it's meant to be explaining a situation rather than explaining something more visual. And also, the analogy made zero sense. So that sentence was pointless and disturbing and gross. Ew, Stephen. And I think that my main disappointment so far with this book is that I think that because the first few chapters was so heavily based on the woman experience, that was absolutely butchered. I immediately lost trust with Stephen King. So whenever I read something of Stephen King that seemed questionable, I am just assuming that it's not realistic. So it's very frustrating, especially whenever the mom comes up and a lot of things that she says to manipulate Carrie, a lot of it is not accurate religiously. So I'm not sure if Stephen King was religious in his lifetime and if he had any sort of like research on, you know, the basic fundamentals of the Bible and Christianity. I don't think that people who are religious should read this because I think that it can be extremely triggering in some parts that actually are realistic. And I also don't think that people who are atheists or not religious should read this book because I feel like it would be a completely skewed, like very minor extremist, not even extremist, like extremist to the point where it is literally fiction, and that is what they're going to think religious people are like. So I really don't know who this book is for. I am a little bit more intrigued by the plot speeding up, and honestly, I kind of just want to like hear the story in Sue's perspective. Like, that's the only girl that I really like right now is Sue. Like, she's over here making moves, she's taking accountability, Sue's a homie. That's all I'm gonna say about Carrie so far. Once again, it's not my favorite book. It really isn't, but I'm a little too curious. So at this point, I've already read halfway through, and once I finish the book or decide to DNF it at some point, that's when you get the next update. Before we move into the parts in between the halfway point and the very end of the book, obviously a lot happened. And obviously I wasn't able to go through everything that I was thinking. I think that one thing that I forgot to put in as something that I actually did like is that towards past the halfway point and before, you know, everything goes down at the climax. I actually did enjoy Carrie's character. And I think that looking back and understanding Carrie's character a little bit more, because I know that a lot of people feel very bad for her and say, well, she was just, like someone who was bullied and someone who was abused at home. She's not a villain. And I understand where they're coming from. And I think that Carrie is simply meant to be a mirror. I think that Carrie is a mirror of people who are around her. Think about it. Like, whenever she's at home, she's extremely fearful and she's very resentful and thinks violent things about doing to her mother. When she's at school, being made fun of by people, she is extremely violent in her thoughts of what she is going to do to them. But whenever she's with Tommy and he treats her very nicely, she also treats him very well. But if you think about all of the other characters that actually have a positive experience with Carrie, she in turn gives them a positive experience. So I don't think that Carrie is necessarily meant to just be, like the underdog for the most part, because people have had very messed up childhoods before, like similar to Carrie's, and they've not had violent tendencies. I can make an entire video just about the character of Carrie herself and some of the symbolism that I was able to see beyond the BS that Stephen King made up about womanhood and Christian theology, but then the video would be way too long. So all I am trying to say is before, in the very beginning, I was not very fond of the character Carrie. I feel a little bit better about her now, getting past the halfway point and before a lot of the climax stuff happened, not all of it. I do think that there obviously was a lot of things that she did towards the end that weren't warranted or weren't necessarily deserved by many strangers that she ended up killing. It's not very clear if she knows them. She probably doesn't, because she's been isolated in her house for so many years until she went to high school. So I felt like that was a bit unfair, but I had no problem with her killing the rest of the people that did her wrong. No issue at all. Hello. I just finished it. And I'm annoyed again. Well, since it's going to take some time for me to say all the things that I disliked about this book, I'm gonna start with the things that I liked about it. Spoiler alert, since it's a horror movie, almost everyone dies. But that shouldn't be much of a spoiler for anybody. I think that the way that Tommy died was generous for Stephen King to do. I think that he could have ruined his character a lot more. There was the potential for him to do that, and I didn't want him to, and I was pleasantly surprised. Unfortunately, that doesn't really change a lot as far as like the plot goes, because regardless if he had not died the way that he did, Carrie still would have killed him, and that's frustrating. I'm sorry, I'm talking about the things that I like. I think that the way that the mom dies is fitting. I enjoyed that as well. That's it. That's really it. Those are the only two things that I was happy about in the second half. Okay, let's start off with how long part 2 is. So I told you before that there were no chapters, correct? Okay, this portion right here, that's one night. And this part could have been 100 pages less than what it was. There were so many times where the timeline jumped back and forth, not chronologically, in the same night, which was extremely confusing. There was literally no point in him doing that, rather than having a little bit more of the shock value be towards the end of the book. But if you just did it chronologically, that would have still been the same thing. Also, the amount of perspectives that is in this book is just exhausting. I think that that's a better way that I would put it, because truthfully, you can kind of figure out whose perspective it was, even though half of the time, somebody's perspective was a completely new character that we never met before and would never talk to or about again. So there was like a lot of pointless side characters just giving their perspective on one tiny sliver of something that happened that night. It was not in chronological order, so it was extremely difficult to keep up with. So not only did I have to keep up with new people, I had to keep up with time frames, and it was just a lot of work, Steven. Like, why are you making me work to read your book? Also, we're circling back to what bothered me initially in the beginning. So, initially in the beginning, I was under the impression, based on what the story had told us so far, because this is the illustration that they gave us, the beginning of the book. They talk about how this was not Carrie's first situation of having telekinetic powers. So they explain that there was a time where when she was 3 years old and her mom got her in trouble for talking to the neighbor about boobs and about womanhood that her mom did not approve of, so she punished Carrie for it. There were rocks that came down on just the house that Carrie and her mom lived in. So it is presumed that Carrie brought those rocks down. But then she didn't have any other instances, again, of telekinesis, which honestly, that story made me feel better, because I was like, okay, he's not heavily basing her traumatic experience as her first period, which he completely butchered, accurately describing and writing. And at first I was really angry because I thought that that would be her main traumatic event, was having her first period and being laughed at in the shower room, and that would kind of like cause the whole entire story to start, which made me upset. But then I was comforted by the fact that that wasn't the first telekinesis thing that Carrie experienced. But then afterwards, whoever is like studying Carrie's telekinesis, which I feel like we get to know his name, but we don't ever get to know him as a character. He's just kind of like this weird, obscure narrator in the background, and every single time he talked, I was like, dude, get out of here. I do not care. After that point, he said in like his findings, which is where that awful line is that I showed you guys initially, where he said that it was pointless to count all of the times that Carrie had had a telekinesis moment in her childhood. And I'm thinking to myself, why did you even bring it up then? For one, why did you bring it up? And for two, that means that my fears are confirmed and that you are basing the trauma that triggers her telekinesis as her having her first period, which was so inaccurately written, and he didn't even bother to do a smidge of research. Okay, and I also looked up his age when he published Carrie. He published Carrie when he was 26 years old. So part of me was thinking, okay, so since he was 26, you know, maybe he was single for a while, maybe he was just a clueless boy, you know, like I guess we're not gonna completely fault him for being a clueless boy, even though he was a full-ass adult. But then I remembered he had a wife, and so I was like, okay, realistically, I don't think that he could, I guess, like get away with not having good research if he was married. Like if you live with a woman, you are more likely to understand what periods are actually like, but he could ask her, you know, he could ask, hey, I am writing a story where the whole entire ass plot is centered on her having a traumatic experience with her period, and she awakens her telekinesis powers and everyone dies. You would think that'd be important. Okay, he literally could have asked her, like in happenstance, as a passerby conversation. And so I was thinking, okay, when did he get married? How old was he when he got married? He was 23. He had 3 years to figure this out. So yes, it is his debut novel. Yes, he is a man. That gives him no excuse as to not doing any research. I do not give a flying rat's ass that Google wasn't invented. Like people did research projects all the time back then. They went to the library. They asked people. They did their research. Sorry, I'm getting very fired up about this. I usually try very, very hard to not include too many emotions in my reviews, and it never ends up working. I do not understand why anybody gives it a 5-star rating. I do not understand why it became his main debut novel. And the thing that is like so much more disappointing is that if you dig through all of the bad story structure, the pointless side characters, the absolute lack of research, if you take all of that out, it could have had really great potential. I was not against the idea of the simple plot itself. It's the way that he wrote it. It's the way that he assumed so many different things that ruined everything. And look, I understand that Stephen King has written many more novels that are more well-beloved than Carrie. So perhaps that was me just walking into a messy situation already. And you know what? I will be fine to admit that. But as far as the ratings go, solid 2 out of 10, and I am generously giving it an extra point because it had potential that was completely squashed. I am still gonna watch the movie. I know a lot of the actors and the actresses that are in it, and I'm excited to see how they play it out. I honestly actually did think throughout this, because the perspectives were so skewed and just so all over the place, I genuinely thought to myself, this would be so much better as a screenplay. Like, I feel like the way that he was writing it and imagined it in his head and set it up, he was setting it up like a movie. So thank you so much for watching, even though literally all of it was me ranting about how bad it was. Okay, well, until next time, until I watch the movie, which, crossing fingers, is a better experience than reading the book. Sayonara, you guys, and I will see you next time.